much for hosting us and for inviting us to your lovely home also. Helen and Muhyiddin are hosting us. And yesterday in Phoenix was a good crowd, and we are really appreciative for how much hospitality we have received. For the people over here on this side, maybe you want to move to the chairs in the middle so that you can see the PowerPoint. So I would suggest that you move to the chairs that are here in the middle. Would you do that? You can see? Okay. All right. So, what am I going to talk to you about? Very briefly, my major advisor used to tell me, tell them what you're going to tell them, then explain it, and then in the end, tell them again what you just told them, so that if somebody comes in the middle of the night and wakes you up at 2 in the morning and says, what did this guy tell you? You are able to summarize it in one sentence. If you are not able to do that, then he didn't do a good job. So anyways, I'll try to do that. So what am I going to tell you? I'm going to tell you that diversity is strength, biodiversity is strength, and human diversity is strength, and that all attempts historically to reduce that biodiversity lead us to catastrophe, lead us to problems. And it is important for us to preserve that diversity, or we as a human species, not that particular groups of people like Palestinians or Jews in Germany or whatever will suffer, but we as humans will end up down the drain, if you want. This is the bottom line I'm going to tell you. So now we'll go back to eating, and we don't have to do it all. Okay, now, as mentioned, my wife and I returned to Palestine in 2008, and since then we've been full-time volunteers to help Palestine. There is a problem in Palestine. There is what they used to call in the Irish problems, the troubles, right? So we have troubles. What are these troubles about, and how do we cure them, if you want? This seems like a complex problem, and they want you to actually believe that it's a complex problem, but it's really a very simple problem. My background is also medical genetics. I used to be at the University of Tennessee, Duke, and Yale in the genetics departments and clinical laboratories and things like that. How do clinicians, doctors, whatever, decide what is the problem of a particular illness? Well, there's 5 pillars of modern medicine. One is to take a patient history. And it's important to take a patient history because you want to know whether this is a congenital problem or it's a temporary problem like COVID-19 that comes and goes. If it's congenital, it's more complex, right? The second aspect of modern medicine is to take the current symptoms. If you exclude congenital diagnosis, you go to current symptoms. Once you identify from those symptoms when they start, what they are, all of this, then that leads you to what we call diagnosis. Diagnosis is what is the illness, what's the problem about. Based on the diagnosis, then you go offer the patient therapy. And the final item is you tell the patient, based on this complex 5 things, the prognosis is you're going to live, you're not going to live, right? Or this is going to be a 2-week thing, or it's going to be a year thing. So we can apply the same logic, if you want, to social phenomena like political problems and conflicts. So let's start with who is this patient that we are talking about. The patient is called Palestine and has been called Palestine for 3,500 years, by the way, mentioned by Herodotus, mentioned by Mesopotamian reliefs and other writings. And this patient is situated in a very nice location. It's an intersection of continents. You can see birds, even 500 million birds migrate from Eurasia to Africa through Palestine. This is also the place that humans migrated out of Africa to the rest of the world. So actually all your ancestors are Palestinian, whether you like it or not. Because sometimes that label can be a dangerous label. As Muhyiddin said, you can be labeled with all sorts of things. But anyways, it's a very important area. It's also geologically and historically very significant. Has the lowest point on earth, for example, around Jericho, has high mountains. So there is actually very rich biodiversity in Palestine. Sorry. So there is rich biodiversity. For example, we have more plant species in this tiny little sliver of land that's no bigger than New Jersey, more species of plants than exists in the whole of the United Kingdom. This diversity of nature, even in the Bible, by the way, it says the land of milk and honey. It's a very rich country. It was never a desert, by the way. The Israelis claim they made the desert bloom. What desert? What are they talking about? Palestine was part of the Fertile Crescent, where humans first developed agriculture. Your ancestors and mine settled there developing agriculture about 12,000 years ago, right? And that's when we domesticated wheat and barley and lentils, chickpeas, like hummus you just had. You wouldn't have the bread if it was not for these ancestors who developed the wheat cultivation, for example. Also, when people went from hunter-gatherers to agricultural communities about 12,000 years ago, they had more time on their hand, of course, with the sustainable food. So they started inventing things like the alphabet. The alphabet that you use, the A, for example, I don't know if you know this or not, comes from Aleph, which is the bull, basically the god of the Canaanites, our ancestors. And that's the Proto-Aramaic alphabet. The B is from Beit, which is a house, a line and a half circle. That's why you get the B in Latin or Arabic or English or Hebrew or any of the other languages that evolved subsequently to Proto-Aramaic. And Palestinian people have had a continuous presence on the land throughout these 12,000 years of so-called civilization. So I say so-called because I'm not sure yet that we are civilized, but that's another issue. Before 1948, 75% of Palestinians lived off of sustainable agriculture. And they lived relatively peaceful with nature. They didn't destroy nature. They didn't generate trash or plastics or anything like that. There was agricultural diversity. But there was also human diversity. For example, this is a picture from Palestine, 1932, when religious and secular leaders got together to protest the Balfour Declaration, which was a declaration made in parallel with a similar French declaration called the Cambon Declaration by the great powers, France and England, the empires at the time in 1917, to support the Zionist project and support basically the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Now these people, religious leaders, Muslims, Christians, Jews, everybody who was in Palestine, Baha'i, Druze, everybody in Palestine rejected the idea of Zionism, political Zionism, which was an idea to take a country that's, as you can see here, multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, and even multilingual. I don't know if you know that before 1948, there were 44 languages spoken in Palestine, not just Arabic and Hebrew and Aramaic. There was also Armenian and Syriac and others. So this is the diversity. And diversity is strength, you know. It is what made our country so healthy, and it made our country immune from wars and conflict. The only wars and conflict that came to us came from outside. For example, if you take away this conflict that came to us from Europe, you'd have to go back to the Crusaders' time to find another conflict, a few centuries back. What happened in between? The people like this lived together in peace. We didn't have problems. We are one of the most peaceful, if not the most peaceful country on earth. Some of you are looking at me like, did Muhyiddin give him some coffee? Or is he hallucinating? Because we hear on CNN, Fox News, and even Hollywood films set in the future 500 years forward, that there is a TV on the futuristic science fiction movies that says, and in the Middle East, fighting continues, as if it will continue another 500 years. they try to portray that there's a conflict that's endless there. Now, why do I say that? Again, because we want to exclude a congenital problem. There's no congenital problem here. We have a problem now, yes. It's a temporary problem, and it will dissipate, inshallah, in my lifetime. I hope if I live another 5, 10, 20 years, I will see the end of it. But if not, we will see the end of it. It's a temporary phenomenon. So there's no congenital problem. Once you exclude that based on ancient history, which is largely peaceful, largely healthy, living sustainably with nature, people of various religious backgrounds, etc., then you go to look at the current problem and look at the symptoms and make the right diagnosis. So what is the current problem? The current problem is also very simple to diagnose. Very simple. In Europe, empires were dissolving and a new concept of world organization was evolving in Europe in the 19th century. It was called nation states. Nation states, unlike empires, are by nature discriminatory to minorities. That is natural. In an empire, you know, the emperor didn't care whether you were Jew, Christian, Muslim, Catholic, Protestant, whatever. But once you break up, like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, into Austria, Hungary, Germany, Poland, etc., then you have problems because you have discrimination against minorities. Protestants in majority Catholic countries, or Catholics in majority Protestant countries, or Jews or Muslims in Europe. There was increased discrimination in the 19th century. Gypsies, Roma people, etc. This is natural to happen as a result of this evolution of political organization, if you want. Now, some Jews, a small, tiny minority of Jews, I say tiny because they were tiny in the late 19th century, when Herzl gathered the first group of these Jews, who thought the best answer to this discrimination is to set up a Jewish state in Palestine. When Herzl gathered the first group of such people, he managed to gather 300 people. I mean, in this room, I think we have about 100. So that's not a lot that he managed to gather. People were not buying this idea that the answer to discrimination is for every sect to make its own state. You know, it doesn't make sense. But anyways, he had power behind him. He managed to get power from rich people like Rothschilds, etc., to do this. And in 1897, they formed the World Zionist Congress. But there was a little tiny problem. The problem was Palestine was not a land without a people, for a people without a land, you know. There were people in there, as I said. And they were multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, multilingual even. And by the way, even the 3% who are Jewish Palestinians, Arab Jews that lived in Palestine, they all rejected the idea of Herzl, of political Zionism and a Jewish state. A chief rabbi of Jerusalem was against it in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Because the Jews in Palestine, as I showed you in the picture, they were part of this mosaic, this fabric of life, and they were content with this fabric of life. Well, so there is this problem. How are you going to take a country that's 97% not Jewish, and the 3% who's Jewish also opposes you, so essentially 100% of the population rejects the idea? How are you going to make it a Jewish state? This is the conundrum. So you need great power support. So they got the support to the British and the French Empire, and of course after the Second World War, much strong American. Actually, even during the First World War, the American government also supported the Balfour and Jules Cambon declarations in 1917. So the idea what to do with the native people was solved by a simple two-word thing called ethnic cleansing. So literally 530 Palestinian villages and towns were wiped off the map, and creating the largest post-World War II refugee population in history. Actually, I should say now, by the way, political refugees, Palestinian refugees, still larger than Ukrainian refugees, larger than Syrian refugees. larger than Afghani refugees, Yemeni refugees, etc. But they are smaller than one refugee population, a new refugee population. And you would never guess what it is. It's called climate refugees. If you heard, climate change is making millions and millions of refugees. Today we have 8 million Palestinian refugees. The number of climate refugees now estimated, different estimates I saw, is between 11 million, 25 million. So anyways, these are the villages that were depopulated in 1948 on the right. The green ones are the ones that remained against all odds in the Galilee and the Negev. And then Israel was created on 78% of Palestine, and then in 1967 occupied the rest of Palestine, which is the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and proceeded to repeat the same process of ethnic cleansing and building Jewish-only colonies for immigrants from Europe and from around the world. This process continues today. Even as we speak, there are homes being demolished and people being ethnically cleansed, and Palestine continues to shrink. How many of you have seen the shrinking map of Palestine, the upper part? Good, there are a number of you who saw it. How many of you know the origin of this map? Who first drew it and why was it drawn? It was actually my son, when he was in middle school in North Carolina, when he saw this map of shrinking United States in one of his textbooks, and he came to me and he said, "Dad, isn't this what happened to your country?" And I said, "No, son, that's what happened to your country." So he said, "Well, shouldn't we draw a map?" I said, "Yeah, shouldn't you draw a map like that for Palestine?" So he did, and that's a map he drew in 1998. I used it in my first book on sharing the land of Canaan, and people have been using it. Don't worry, no copyrights. I'm not a fan of copyrights. So what is the diagnosis? The diagnosis is very simple. 2 words. Again, just like ethnic cleansing, 2 words is the diagnosis. Settler colonialism. Please remember those 2 words. Don't try to diagnose an illness with symptoms of an illness. For example, military occupation is a symptom of settler colonialism. It's not the underlying etiology of the problem. Now, how do we know that we have the right diagnosis? How do good doctors agree? When I was at Yale Medical School, we had the pathology conference every Friday where we discuss patient cases, and we sometimes disagree. How do we agree? Well, when one of us says to the other, "Well, wait a minute, your diagnosis, there's a symptom here that doesn't fit it, or there's a test here that doesn't fit it," then we kind of come around and say, "Okay, that other one is more right diagnosis." So in this case, how do you know that this is settler colonialism is the right diagnosis? It's the same thing. You can look at the totality of symptoms, and I can spend the rest of the night talking about symptoms. I don't want to waste too much of your time, but we want to talk about the diagnosis. But let me give you one symptom just to show you as a test of this idea of testing the diagnosis by using a symptom. In my village of Beit Sahur, the shepherd's field where the shepherds heard the angels sing, went up to Bethlehem where Jesus was born, and literally the Church of Nativity is up the hill from my house. This little town, which is 70% Christian, 30% Muslim, in 1988 was the leader of nonviolent disobedience. So one of our actions was to bring 18 cows into town. Yeah, you heard me right, 18 cows. This was in violation of an Israeli military order that says Palestinians cannot own milking cows. We also cannot collect rainwater. Hundreds of things we cannot do. One of them is we cannot own milking cows. So we smuggled these cows into town. The Israeli officer discovered them and took pictures of them and told us we have to kill them within 24 hours. After some negotiations, he gave us 48 hours, and then he came back 48 hours later with his soldiers, and the cows were gone. So he started a military operation, which I have to name their military operations. So they called it Operation Hunt Cow. I kid you not. This is to find these fugitive cows supplying this terroristic substance called milk. Okay? Now, Think about this one tiny symptom. Would it fit, for example, a religious diagnosis? Because you hear about those Muslims, those Jews, this, it doesn't fit. I mean, the cows, to my knowledge, are not wearing kippas or whatever. And the people who smuggled these cows, who were in on this conspiracy, 30% were Muslim, 70% were Christian, and we were all in on this conspiracy. So it doesn't fit a religious conflict. Does it fit a military occupation? As I said, military occupation is part of the problem. But would that be the underlying problem, military occupation? Sorry, but it doesn't fit. The US occupied Iraq, and still, by the way, occupies Iraq with a large American military contingent. They didn't tell the Iraqis you can't have milking cows. When the Germans occupied France, they didn't tell the French you cannot have your la vache qui rit, the laughing cow. So it doesn't fit military occupation, okay? So what does it fit? Does it fit settler colonialism? Absolutely, yes. It's the same reason our founding fathers and their friends killed millions of these creatures called bison or buffaloes. And that denies the food to those indigenous people that we didn't want. I say we because I'm also an American citizen, so I'm an inheritor of this history, of this heritage. It fits. So even this tiny symptom allows you to make the right diagnosis. Once you make the right diagnosis, you can offer the right therapy. If you don't, you're liable to kill the patient even with your therapy if you misdiagnose the illness, okay? If a patient comes to you, for example, with cancer, and if I have cancer, and God forbid, I have symptoms like skin rash, headaches, anemia, and if a doctor tells me, well, your problem is really the anemia, for the skin rash, take some cream, and for the headache, some aspirin, and for the anemia, we'll give you iron supplement. I'll be dead, after a while. So it is not helpful to make the wrong diagnosis, right? Now, what is the outcome of settler colonialism? That's prognosis. And what's the therapy of settler prognosis? These are the last two items we need to talk about, right? Outcome is very clear. Prognosis for settler colonialism is easy to find. Why? Because you have many patients who got it. You have all the countries on earth suffered from it. There's not a single country on earth that escaped settler colonialism. It's a common human disease, like the COVID. I'm sure all of you got COVID, whether you felt it or didn't feel it, you must have gotten it. Now, why did some people die from it? Some felt it 2 weeks. They were sick, some didn't feel it. Different body systems, immune systems. As the doctor told me when I went to him with COVID-19, he said, well, if you don't have diabetes and underlying immune problems, then you shouldn't worry about it, okay? 2 weeks, you'll be up and running. So this is part of the therapy, is the resistance of the body, okay? Sometimes it helps to get chicken soup and vitamins and other things from outside to support you recover faster from those illnesses. But to go back to settler colonialism, resistance is a key part, and I want to talk about resistance in a minute. But let me put that aside and say, what's the outcome? Since all countries had it, what was the outcome in all other countries? Well, the most common outcome, by the way, found in most countries on earth, like 160, 170 countries, is that the descendants of the colonized and the descendants of the colonizers live in one country. This happened in Latin America, for example, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, all these countries, right? Also in Central America, like Colombia, and in North America, like Mexico and Canada, and in Asia and Europe, all of Europe, by the way. Not a single country in Europe escaped colonialism, or was not a colonizer itself. Some countries were both. For example, England was colonized by the Romans, and then became also a large colonizing country. Spain is another example. So this is the outcome that's most common, and as somebody who's scientific and objective, I say that's the most likely outcome for this patient too, for Palestine. There are two other outcomes that are rare, but can happen. But the likelihood of them happening is very small because historically there isn't very many examples. One is the genocide model, as happened in Australia with the Aborigines, and to a large extent in this country, where the natives were killed in large mass by disease and by direct killing. That's scenario 2. Scenario 3 is what happened in Algeria, when 1 million French packed their bags and go to Europe. I don't say back to France, because many of them have never seen France in their lives. They were 6, 7, 8 generations in Algeria. They even spoke French with a very different accent than the French people in the mainland, so to speak. And this was very bloody, by the way. Almost genocide also, because some 2 to 3 million Algerian lives were killed, people were killed, and also 150,000 French lives were lost. Now, I don't know which one do you guys prefer, but we Palestinians, by and large, prefer that first option. It's the most common sense, logical option. We pushed for it from the beginning. It's even in the charter of the PLO, etc. Okay? Now, if this is the prognosis that's going to happen, because inevitably that's what happens to most patients, they get over COVID-19. Never say never. I mean, there are genocide, for example, ideas not out of the mind of many Israeli, even cabinet ministers, who express it openly, that we should just wipe out Gaza, make it a flat area like a football field. So I'd never say never on the other two scenarios, but the most likely scenario is the first scenario. That's one country for all its citizens after decolonization. Now, it's an important word to remember also, decolonization. Decolonization in all the other countries where it happened also involved the return to the system of diversity, which again, as I told you, I follow the advice of my major advisor. I keep repeating this word, diversity. So, okay, so we come to the therapy part. Well, I do want to talk about some symptoms. I didn't want to bore you with a lot of symptoms, and I want to talk about a symptom that you don't hear much about, which is the environmental symptom. Now, we could talk endlessly about the suffering of Palestinians, for example, that there are 100,000 native Palestinians who were killed, over 800,000 who were injured since 1948, and nearly 1 million of us have been imprisoned. But I want to focus on the environmental issues. Now, environmentally, globally, we face huge challenges. And these challenges, you can see them here: climate change, pollution, habitat destruction, etc. There's estimates from some scientists now that there's actually more plastics in the ocean than there is fish in the ocean. So we're in trouble as a species. We are in trouble. Now, we can add settler colonialism to that list, and that's the part I want to focus about because you don't hear much about it. And I want to just cite a few examples of the effect of settler colonialism on our environment. Let me start with those villages that were destroyed, that I showed you the map of them with the red dots that showed the destroyed Palestinian villages in 1948. There were more Palestinian villages that were destroyed in 1967. One of them, and I wish Qumsiyeh had spoken about, is his village of Amwas, destroyed in 1967. His family was expelled from Amwas. And they destroyed his village, and they destroyed all the trees around his village, and they planted what? Instead of this polyculture of trees, they planted pine trees, Pinus halepensis. This happened in Canada Park. It also happened in all the other villages and towns that you saw there. And the Jewish National Fund was responsible for this program, which is supposedly making the desert green, but it was not making the desert green. It was making a desert, and I'll explain in a minute. Because you took out the normal trees, the indigenous trees, you destroyed them, you bulldozed them, and you planted pine trees, European pine trees. Pine trees destroy biodiversity. making what's a desert? You know, a lack of biodiversity. In the desert you find biodiversity. When you have one tree, that's not biodiversity. That is destruction. And not only that, these trees, because of they are planted in a dry climate, not Northern European climate, which they are more adapted to, they're more susceptible to fires. So you see these fires in the Galilee and Western Jerusalem and other places which happen. This fire, for example, in Western Jerusalem, removed the pine trees, and in so doing, actually exposed the Palestinian terraces that were built over thousands of years that had other kinds of trees planted on them that were uprooted to plant those pine trees. Israel also diverted the water of the Jordan River from the northern part, from Lake Tiberias to the west. This was also for replacement agriculture, not for new agriculture. Israel didn't add 1 square mile of agricultural land, okay? They just did replacement agriculture. Instead of rain-fed agriculture, they wanted to have rain-fed agriculture being things that have evolved over thousands of years ago in that landscape, including wheat, barley, lentils, chickpeas, and others. These were replaced with irrigated agriculture by diverting the waters from the headwaters of the Jordan River to the west. This only replaced agriculture in the west, but in the east, it did much more damaging, because basically in the east, when you have diverted the water, the Jordan River was no longer a river. This is what the Jordan River looks like on the upper left-hand corner, looked like, past tense, and it was flowing at 1,350 million cubic meters. Now it flows at 20 million cubic meters per year. It is actually not a river anymore. It's a small stream. You could literally walk across it and the water wouldn't get to your knees. And in most of its southern part, the width of the stream is no longer than the stretch of my arms here. This is the reality. This is what they have done. And around the Jordan Valley, basically you got desertification. And so Israel actually increased the desert, the amount of land that's desert or semi-arid. This is looking from the north-south. The lake closest to us is Lake Tiberias, and the lake that's next to it is the Dead Sea. It's neither dead nor a sea, by the way. It had actually 12 species of algae in it. Now they are down to 4 species, and soon that salt lake will disappear. Okay? Dead Sea lost 40-some% of its surface area already because of the diversion of the water. But more importantly, I want you to see around the Dead Sea and the areas of the Jordan Valley how much yellowish areas are increasing thanks to this mega projects by the Zionists. So Israel did not make the desert green. Israel actually made the green areas arid, semi-arid, desert even. There was the drainage of the wetlands of the Hula area in the north. On the lower right-hand side, you see pictures of Palestinian women who have cut those reeds from the Hula area. Israel drained both the wetlands and the lake, Lake Hula, leaving a very small area you can see in the middle. But this not only resulted in ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian area, they actually pushed them at the point of the gun to leave the area of the wetlands, and but it also destroyed the habitats for birds and other species. And 219 species of animals disappeared in the Hula area thanks to the action of this country that dubs itself as a green state or green country. Israel is remarkable around the world for actually doing things that are so harmful and then blaming others, or what we call in psychology transference. For example, they claimed the Arabs wanted to throw the Jews into the sea, right? Do you know when that idea came about? came about right after Israel literally threw the Palestinians into the sea in Haifa and Jaffa, when they sent them on boats, put them on boats, sent them to Lebanon or to Gaza on boats, literally threw the Palestinians into the sea. If it was an actual process before 1948 that the Arabs wanted, past tense, to throw the Jews into the sea, they have to show me the evidence that people before 1948 said anything about removing Jews from Palestine. This just didn't happen. But they did it, physically did it, and then they transferred it to them. Same thing with green area. They say, well, the Arab countries are not taking care of their nature, while we are taking care of our nature. And I showed, thank you very much. And I showed you actually examples of this, that they did this, that they increased desert areas, right? But here I want to show you another example which people don't talk about, which is that Israel says to the world that we have the largest amount of land allocated as nature reserves. They do that, by the way. They say 17 or 18% of the land of Israel, which is Palestine, is allocated as nature reserve. Okay, let's take that word and proceed to look at it. First of all, guess who designs nature reserves in Israel? Who actually puts the borders around them? You can see this in an Israeli map, by the way. And the nature reserves are in the Galilee and the Negev, where there are remaining Palestinians, and in the Jordan Valley is most of them. Well, who drew these areas? Who mapped them? Not a single biologist was involved in them. Not a single person who knows anything about wildlife, okay? It was the Jewish National Fund, a supranational entity established in 1905 with the explicit program. They used it in 1905. I can show you the documents. That our purpose is to colonize Palestine for the sake of the Jewish people everywhere, and to exclude the native Palestinians, to ethnically cleanse the native Palestinians. Now, if the Jewish National Fund designates what's called nature reserves, by international law, this is not acceptable. Jewish National Fund employs how many biologists or nature people or anything? None, zero, okay? So they clearly have nothing to do with nature reserve in most of these supposed nature reserves. Well, why do they declare them? They declare them to exclude the indigenous people, those savages, those barbarians, and develop them. And that's what they do. I can show you a lot of evidence on this. I'll show you just a couple of evidence here. In the Jordan Valley, in the map on the right, you see the nature areas in green and the military training zone in red on top of the green areas. How could you have both a nature reserve and a military training zone on the same site? In the map on the middle, the same thing in the South Hebron Hills. Some of you have heard about the attempts to ethnically cleanse Palestinians over the past 25, 30 years from the South Hebron Hills. The reason they want to remove them is to simply acquire the land. Ironically, I discovered recently, I didn't know this myself, some interesting fact. Do you know what is the first protected area in the world designated by a national government? And which government was that? And what protected area was that? It was Yellowstone in America. Yellowstone was the first nationally designated protected area in the world. And guess when they submitted to Congress, what they put to convince the Congress that this is a good thing to do? They wrote one of the three major excuses or ideas was to exclude the Indians from the nature reserve. And they did. They excluded the Indians, they kicked them out. But unlike Israel, by the way, it's still a nature reserve. Yellowstone is still protected. In our case, they excluded the natives and they developed these areas as industrial parks, as residential neighborhoods. All the green areas, that's 18% that they used as an excuse to exclude people, or as military training zones like the South Hebron Hills, where in the South Hebron Hills you see things happening like this, with military training, while the same authorities, Israeli soldiers notice, not nature parks people, arresting those people for doing what? For picking wild oregano, za'atar, which there is some za'atar back there for sale if any of you want to buy. It's a staple diet of the Palestinians to have za'atar in our breakfast. So they arrested these kids for picking wild oregano while supposedly damaging nature. Well, if it's damaging nature, where are the nature parks? People to arrest them. Why is it soldiers that are arresting them? The same soldiers who are doing this on top of the same oregano that, that they are. You know, it doesn't make sense. Well, it makes sense. Logic of colonization. I guess that's logic. That's sense. So there is also, our students do research like this, like the genotoxic effect of Israeli industrial settlements built in some of those nature reserves, or in other places where they built settlements next to Palestinian communities that damage our health. There is, of course, natural resource usage, water, springs in the West Bank. I could tell you endless stories about them. It's a sad story. Most open springs in the West Bank are now closed, and they have destroyed all the habitat that around the flowing open springs, because they didn't want the Palestinians to come and collect the water from their spring. So they dug and they closed the spring and they take the water directly with pipes. But that also not only kills the Palestinian communities, it also kills the habitats for frogs and water birds and plants and so on. Natural resources are being depleted at a very high rate and very damaging to our environment. I'm not a fan of natural gas, but you can see here why Gaza is besieged or blockaded. Gaza is blockaded not because of Hamas or rockets that are occasionally tossed from Palestinian refugees in Gaza, who can literally see their homes across the border that Israel has stolen from them. Anyway, it's not because of the rockets or because of Hamas or anything else. It's because of these gas fields. Evidence of that is overwhelming, very clear. Why is it that fishermen are not allowed to go fish more than 6 nautical miles into the sea? Why 6 miles? Are they going to cause terrorism at 6 miles, and at 7 miles they're not going to cause terrorism? No, it's because at 7 miles, that's where the gas fields that Israel is stealing, exploiting from Palestinians, and now they're exporting it to Europe, or will be exporting it soon, I think, to Europe, to replace Russian gas. After somebody also, we don't know who, destroyed the pipelines that connect Russia to, to Northern Europe, and the US with all its might and all its sensory equipment couldn't find out who did it, all right? But we won't talk about that. Okay, now this is next to my village of Beit Sahur. This is Jabal Abu Ghnaim, what it looked like in 1997. As a kid, I used to go there, catch butterflies, watch birds. That's how I learned to love nature. My uncle used to take me to these hills around our village. This is the only forested area between Bethlehem and Jerusalem, or was the only forested area between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. And they even stole some land from my own relatives in the valley for this. And you can see its transformation over a few years to become a Jewish-only colony or settlement on Palestinian land. The destruction, of course, continues. Now, I said I will talk about the symptoms that are environmental, and I don't want to talk about a lot of other symptoms like the walls and torture and etc., freedom of movement, lack of freedom of education, lack of freedom of religion. All of these things we can talk about if you want. I'm happy to address questions. But anyways, I do want to talk about solutions, and that's the therapy, part of the therapy. And Muhyiddin mentioned that what we do in this Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability is a form of resistance. So how is it a form of resistance? Well, it's very simple. What the Institute aims for is sustainable human and natural communities, even against all odds. That's why it has the words biodiversity and sustainability in the title. And doing this against all odds, having an agriculture, having food sovereignty, having these things, educating our children, all of these things are resistance. Why? Because the Zionists don't want us there. They don't want us to do anything there. They want us simply out of the country. By the way, that's worse than apartheid in South Africa. Apartheid in South Africa didn't want the blacks outside the country. They wanted the blacks isolated in Bantustans and to continue to do indentured labor in the white factories and gold mines and diamond mines and all these things. In our case, that's not the case. Israel is happy to use Palestinian labor interim, but then they can also get Bangladesh labor and other countries to send labor. So they just want us out, period, end of story. So when I'm drinking a cup of tea in Palestine, I'm engaged in resistance. When we get married in Palestine, we're engaged in resistance because Israel doesn't want us there. They usually, when they question me, by the way, they question me on the way back, not on the way out. On the way out, Allah yasahil alayk, go. So they want to harass us on the way in. So anyways, so what we do in this institution is forms of resistance. And there are many sections of this institute. We have a museum of natural history, an ethnographic museum, etc. We do work with the communities, etc. This institute also has a couple of Rotarians here with us, including the district governor. I am president of the Bethlehem Rotary Club, and we have a partnership with the Institute and the Bethlehem Rotary Club and other Rotary clubs around the world to do various works, and I'll be speaking at the Rotary Club later this week. Here's, for example, some of the activities we did with the Rotary clubs to buy equipment when COVID-19 hit. We bought equipment for testing for COVID-19. We also delivered food packages to needy families, etc. After COVID subsided, we delivered those water coolers to Bethlehem schools, 35 schools. Already got these cooler units. They have filters in them, so they filter the water and also provide clean, cold water to drink. The Institute itself, and I'll talk more when I speak to the Rotarians about some other functions that we do, and some plans for even bigger functions to do. But our institute has rainwater harvesting system, this pond, that helps us because Israel cuts the water for us. Israel takes 95% of the water of the West Bank, leaving us very little, and they cut it off occasionally. So we try to save water. This is pictures from the Natural History Museum or exhibit, and from the ethnography exhibit, which exhibits both tangible and intangible cultural heritage that we're trying to preserve. The left picture, by the way, is when we were showing to a school of special needs, children, Down syndrome, etc., the insects in Palestine. We have aquaponic systems. We even showed people from Gaza how to build these systems, and they are doing it in Gaza. These systems help you conserve water. I encourage you here to develop aquaponics because you can grow fish and vegetables in the same space, very limited space, with very limited water loss, evaporative water loss, because all the water ends up, or most of it ends up, either in the fish or in the vegetables. We have a community garden. We support this community garden at the bottom. We developed with the help also of the Rotary Club of Bethlehem and with support of Kansas Rotary Club and others, where we actually grow vegetables. The refugees from the 3 refugee camps, but primarily from the one closest to us. They come and plant some things and grow vegetables and stuff like that. These are just some pictures of our children's activities. We do activities every week for children at the museum, at the institute, at the botanic garden. We also have a playground. You can see our activities are all hands-on activities for children because we believe in hands-on work, not in talking to them or whatever. I mean, we do talk to them, but also in hands-on. You know, there's a Chinese saying that goes, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. So we want them to do things by hand. And that's why they do this. And also via playing, etc. A few weeks ago, we rescued 5 baby hyenas. The striped hyenas, by the way, are indigenous to Palestine. So we rescued baby hyenas, and this is one of our international volunteers showing the hyena when we got him to some of the kids. Again, touch, feel, kind of exploration is what children do. You can see the proud face of a child on the upper right-hand corner, having picked his own olives and pickled them. You know, here kindergarten kids learning about butterflies, even dressing as butterflies in the lower right-hand corner. We work also with other communities. Women, for example, we have activities for women where they learn to make their own products from natural material, from herbs, plants in the garden. In this case, they're learning about cosmetics and making cosmetics from plants, and or making foods and selling them and stuff like that. As you can see, packaging all organic material, and we help them with marketing those products. We have a mobile educational unit or mobile museum that we take to marginalized communities. We took them even to the South Hebron Hills, this museum on wheels, if you want. We took it to the South Hebron Hills, where homes are being demolished, as are schools being demolished. So we work with the children there. We actually helped develop the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan for Palestine for 2050. And we work both at the local level in Bethlehem, at the region, at the national level throughout Palestine. Obviously, we're not allowed to go inside the green line, but we have partnership with people there, like the Galilee Society, that works with our people or remnants of our people that are left in Palestine, 1948 areas we call them. But we also work at the regional level. We help countries regionally, and we work at the global level. For example, on climate change issue, we're partners with the Extinction Rebellion. We're part of Extinction Rebellion on climate change, etc. Thanks. Yeah, I think we all need to work on climate change and environmental issues because it is an existential threat to humanity. Now, we have been remarkably successful. I could talk endlessly about our projects. Of course, I'm excited about what we do and how we do it. We do research, we do education, we do conservation, community service development. We worked with 80 farmers, for example, in one small project where we showed them how to plant like their ancestors planted, which is in harmony with nature and with native seeds, etc. And we showed them they could increase their production. On average, those 80 farmers increased their production by 35% over a 3-year period by using only organic material. And they cut their cost because they stopped using pesticides, insecticides, chemical fertilizers, things like that. So we have been very successful. Our keys to our success is our people. Our people are young people. We take them, students, we develop them. And one of my students published a paper when he was a freshman, in school, in college, So they start young and we develop them. These are just some pictures of the people that we work with, volunteers and staff. As I said, Jesse and I, as you heard also, Jesse and I are full-time volunteers 7 days a week. We don't take vacations. Actually, yesterday was the only time on this trip. We took a few hours. We went to the Botanic Garden in Phoenix. So I consider this a vacation. And thank you, Muhyiddin, for doing that for us, because it was nice to see. And tomorrow, I think we're going to go to the Desert Museum, so that's nice. Also, we get ideas from these, by the way. This is also work in some way, because we get ideas for our own botanic garden, our own museum, which we plan to build more, bigger museum, as I'll show you in a minute. So more than 60–70% of our work is done by volunteers, not paid staff. We have very few paid staff. We have 7 full-time equivalent staff members now, but a few years ago we had none, 0. It was all dependent on volunteers. These are just some of the volunteers doing fun things like picking olives, or making apricot jam, or working in the garden, or in the case in the upper right-hand corner, building a biogas unit in 1 day. By the way, they built a biogas unit, or having food and things like that. We welcome you to come and volunteer. Our volunteers were as young as 9 years old and as old as 90 years old. So we provide volunteers with room and board, and they do good work in our garden. So we don't just think outside the box. We think the box doesn't exist. This is an imaginary. I wrote a chapter in a book on decolonization, by the way. It's titled Liberation from Mental Colonization, if you want. It's on our website, which is PalestineNature.org. You can read our papers there, including this paper on liberation from mental colonization. Our motto at the institution is respect. First, as Palestinians, we respect ourselves. We can liberate ourselves. That's a natural immunity that we have to return us to healthy condition. What's healthy condition? This is a quiz for you. What is the bottom line I wanted to get to you? Diversity. Good job. You get an A. I'm being my professor hat, okay? But anyway, so that's a healthy condition that we will return to, and Zionism is already failing at its mission, if not past tense failed already. So respect for ourselves. Second is respect for other people, which is also related to what? To diversity. Respect other people regardless of their religion, background, etc. And the third is respect for nature, which is the animals and plants this planet shares with us. That's biodiversity. So again, diversity. So as I promised, I told you the bottom line of what I said in the beginning, so that you remember it tonight if you dream about it. Our dream, by the way, is this. We are going to have a building like this. If you are inclined, as Muhyiddin said, to donate, if you have a rich uncle or aunt who want to sponsor and put their name on this building, we're happy to receive your money. But we actually are two-thirds getting there. So I need just 1/3, and every $20, $50, whatever helps. This is what it looks like from the other side, and this is what the complex of buildings will look like. So our motto is respect. Our logo is this Palestine sunbird. It's a beautiful little, smallest bird in Palestine, but a very loud, wonderful voice, wonderful voice. And I think that is good that we decided to have this as our national bird. Because yes, we are fragile, we are small, but we do have a voice, and you can help us amplify this voice. And I hope you will join us. To join us, as mentioned, there's PalestineNature.org, or you can email me at email us at info@PalestineNature.org. Jessie is here. She is our volunteer coordinator. And if you want to volunteer, talk to her about how to volunteer. There's a lot that can be done even from here as a volunteer if you want. or helping us in other ways, networking us with key people like, others. We have big projects planned also beyond this building, by the way. We plan to create a green belt. This is the Rotarian project I want to talk to the Rotary about, to create a global grant for it, where we create a green belt around Bethlehem to stop desertification spreading to Bethlehem, by the way. And then we have another project to create a biosphere reserve in the western Bethlehem region. So the green belt on the eastern part and the western part, biosphere reserve, where we benefit 62,000 Palestinians in 8 communities that are marginalized and that are being pushed out, like Nahalin, Al-Walaja, Batir, and other places. And this picture is just me being arrested a few times. Obviously I'm not well liked. I don't know why. I'm a nice person. But anyways, I like the picture on the upper right-hand corner. I actually later thanked that soldier for arresting me, because I said, my t-shirt said, "Got human rights, Palestinians don't." And when he arrested me, he proved me right, okay? So, anyways, that's all I have, and I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you very much. And feel free to ask any question, whether about subjects I covered or other subjects that may come to mind. I'm really impressed by everybody, coming here on such a night. The room is full, so that's good that you have the interest. How many of you, by the way, have been to Palestine? Raise your hand. So maybe a quarter of the room or less, 20%. So the rest of you need to come. We would welcome you. And those who have come again, and you will see our regular progress. If you